Jesus entered the temple area and proceeded to drive out those who were selling things, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." And every day he was teaching in the temple area. The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people, meanwhile, were seeking to put him to death. But they could find no way to accomplish their purpose because all the people were hanging on his words. The Gospel of the Lord. My house shall be a house of prayer. Yet, at that time, no one could say that the temple was not a highly respected place, sacred and most holy for the Jews. Around it, within, there were some of the structures of the temple itself, an intense trade of animals to be sacrificed, and offerings that were given for the maintenance of the temple. It was an obligation of the Jews around the world to pay tax to the temple. That is what the Lord wants to suppress, to purify. Evidently, that has nothing to do, or very little to do with us, although many churches, especially important churches, cathedrals, monumental churches, there is always sometimes inside the temple itself a chapel, a secluded place where some souvenirs, rosaries, images of the Virgin Mary venerated in that temple are sold. But it is not a situation that generates a distortion to the service, the main mission of the temple. However, other things do generate noise. When temples are dedicated to other activities, sometimes they may be religious activities, sometimes they can be charitable activities, and sometimes they can even be recreational activities, a concert, even a theatrical performance. We must be very careful with that, very careful, because the temple is a sacred place where the sacred character of the temple cannot be lost. If these activities distort, taint, or impede the development of what should be essential in the temple, they cannot be admitted. There may be exceptions. Well, I think there have always been exceptions. Christmas time comes, a concert of classical music. Well, but always bearing in mind that the temple is a sacred place and that the sacred aspect of the temple cannot be distorted or tarnished with things that offend what the church teaches about morality or what the church requires for the temple. Now, this unfortunately happens in some cases. Even recently, I think in Spain, what happened in the Cathedral of Toledo, the Archbishop was ignorant of what was going to happen and then apologized for what happened. However, these are things that happen relatively infrequently, at least in the vast majority of places. Instead, there are other things that are very frequent. The lack of respect for the Lord. When people are in the temple as if they were on the street talking, When the postures in the temples are as if you were in a cafeteria, when the clothes in the temple have nothing to do with the minimum decorum that is required, which should be required perhaps in all places, but certainly in the temple. All that will not depend on those responsible for the church, as when a theatrical performance is made for a video with scenes, subdued tone, that depend on each and every one of us. When you take your children to church, and it is great that families take their children to the church and go to Mass together, but you also have to try and educate your children so that they learn to be with a certain respect, knowing that they are children, but with a certain respect in the church. Among other things, because the priest can be uncomfortable, he can be distracted, he can lose the thread of what he's preaching. He's a human being, although many refuse to recognize it. He gets distracted and suddenly he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not a machine. He's not reading a text. They also interrupt, they disturb the people who are trying to listen or follow the Mass. We must find a balance. And it is up to each one of us to safeguard the respect due to the house of God. And that this house of God may be for everyone a house of prayer. That this house of God may be a place of recollection, where there is a propitious environment for you to close your eyes and talk to God. But if there is no such respect, not to unfortunately say, the Eucharistic celebration is full of things and noises that prevent that concentration and that relationship with God, then we are perverting the meaning for which that sacred space was created. We may talk to God anywhere, and we should talk to God anywhere. However, the house of God is a house of prayer. It has to be kept that way, because we all have the need to and the right to be able to meet with the Lord in His house where He lives, so that we can open our hearts to Him, beg for His help, and maybe cry our tears. Each one has to do his part according to his responsibility, so that the house of God may be a house of prayer. Amen.